The final component that we're going to be putting in our winter candle ring is this little white cedar sprig. Now this is based off of a tree that I have in my yard. It's also called an arbor vitae. Pretty sure I've said that very wrong, but this is how you spell it. Now what I did is I went and I grabbed a little sprig of this off of my tree. I grabbed a little branch and then I pulled one little tiny sprig, the smallest sprig on that little leaf that I could find, to kind of emulate in beads. So, and I did simplify it a little bit because I didn't want this candle ring design to get too complicated. Eventually I might design a larger cedar branch that's a little bit more on point. But for this, I wanted it simple just to create the kind of feathery texture that the cedar leaves give into our little candle ring. So we're going to be working with the branching fringe, which is kind of an advanced version of wire back fringe. So this whole leaf here is going to be made on a single length of wire. And there's like multiple layers of fringes, fringes within fringes, all the way down through this leaf. Now, because we're going to be weaving wire up and down through the beads, we're working with a size 11 seed bead, and we need wire that fits through there twice, which is the 28 gauge wire. This is 28 gauge green copper core wire. And I do recommend for this project especially that you use a brand of wire that's really high quality, because we're going to be weaving up and down through the beads. There's going to be a little bit more strain on the wire, and I think you're going to have a much less frustrating experience if you're working with a higher quality wire. So this is Parawire, which is my favorite brand to work with. Highly recommend theirs. I also recommend these things. This is a spool tamer. You can just wrap the elastic around your spool and then feed the end of your wire through the little plastic bit, and that helps keep your spool from kind of exploding and springing everywhere. And you can just pull out more wire as you need it off of the spool. Let's talk about the bead colors that we're going to be working with. We have two different colors. These are size 11 seed beads. I've got an opaque forest green. This is Toho 47H. And then kind of an opaque lustery avocado colored green, which is Toho 1610. And then of course you're also going to need a ruler and some wire cutters. Now for this design I am going to be using my bead spinners, but the most beads that we're going to be picking up at a time is 12. So if you want to just put them on a bead mat and just scoop them up that way, that is totally fine. It works perfectly for this design. You don't really need a bead spinner for this one. Now because we are working with a wire back fringe, we do need to cut wire off of the spool instead of working with our wire still attached. So we're going to cut for one little leaf. We need about 3 feet of wire. I use somewhere between 2.5 and 3 feet for each of my little sprigs. So if you cut about 3 feet, that should give you plenty to work with. Now I recommend after you cut this wire off your spool that you immediately straighten it. You can actually straighten it while you're pulling it off. Just make sure that it's nice and straight because that makes it easier to work with, helps tame your wire a little bit better. Alright, now we are going to start by stringing 5 of the darker green, which I'm going to call color E. So darker green is color E, and then this lighter green is going to go with the tips of all of our little fringes, and I'm going to call that color F. Alright, so I'm going to string 5E and then 2F for our first fringe. And I'm going to slide this down to the middle of my wire. So I'm going to kind of fold my wire in half, try to make them somewhat even. It doesn't need to be perfect. Now this end over here that's closer to the lighter green, we want those lighter greens at the end of our fringe, the top part of our fringe. So I'm going to use that wire to weave back down through this first fringe. So to do a fringe, I'm going to skip that first light green bead, that first F, and I'm going to take my wire back down this direction through the lower 6 beads. So I'm going to go all the way through those beads. I'm going to hold them in place and then pull my wire through. And as I'm pulling my wire through, I'm going to watch this loop very, very carefully, make sure it's not going to form any kinks. And I'm going to pull that all the way through. And then that little bead that we skipped is going to act like a little stopper right there at the top of our fringe. All right, so we're going to have this first little fringe is the tip of our branch right here at the top. And we're going to be weaving down. We've got 2 working wires, 2 long tails. They should be roughly the same length. It doesn't need to be perfect, just somewhere close. So we've got 2 tails of the wire. And we're going to be weaving it down, starting right here at the top, and then making our branches as we go down, like this. Okay. So I'm going to choose the wire that is longest. I do recommend that you always choose the longer. If there is one wire that's a little bit longer than the other one, use that one to make the fringe that you're about to start making. Because that way you'll have, things will even out a little bit better that way if you're always just working with the longest wire. All right. For this next fringe, I'm going to string 3E and 2F. All right, so 3 darker green and 2 lighter green. And we're going to scooch that right down beside the previous fringe. Every time that I go to find the end of my wire, I use that as an opportunity to straighten out my wire just by running my finger along it. Definitely makes it easier to work with and less likely to form kinks. All right, so I'm going to skip that little F bead at the end. I'm just going to move that down and out of the way. And I'm going to take my wire back down through the last 4 beads. So all the way back down. And I'm going to pinch and hold those 2 fringes together. It makes it less likely that they're going to slip around. Pull my wire through. And I'm going to watch my loop the whole time to make sure that it's not forming a kink. If it does, I will stop immediately and fix it. All right, so we've got our first 2 fringes there. There's a little bit of space there. I think I'm going to leave that though. That's not too much. Okay, so we've got our first 2 fringes there on our little leaf. And now we're going to step down to the next layer. So we're going to add a little bit to the main branch down the center. And we're going to do that. We need 3 of these E beads. And we're going to put them on both wires. So both of our little tail wires are going to go through the same direction of these 3 E beads and move them all the way down so that they sit right below those little fringes. So we've just added a little bit of length to the main branch down the center. I'm going to choose the wire. I've got one that's a little bit longer than the other, so I'm going to use that one to make my next fringe. And I'm just going to pull that wire over to the side where I need it. Our next fringe is going to go on this side because that one is on this side. All of our branches are going to alternate left and right. Now I always flip it over so that I'm working on the right side because I'm right-handed and it feels a little funny to kind of reach over my leaf to try to pull that little fringe through. So I'm going to be flipping it back and forth. Hopefully I don't confuse anybody if you're looking at my pictures from the PDF. All right, so our next fringe, we need 4E and 2F. Okay, so 4 the dark green, 2 the lighter. Move those down right beside the leaf. And when I want to hold tension on my beads, I usually do that just by pushing upward with my finger right on the back of those beads. It'll help me to hold those beads in place. I've already pulled this top F bead out of the way. Straighten out my wire and loop it back towards my work so that I have a nice clean path through. And I'm going to take my wire back down through those 5 beads. Make sure that I've skipped that top bead. Hold my fringe in place. I'm kind of holding the previous fringes and the new fringe right in place. It makes it less likely that it's going to slip around. Pull all the way through, watch my loop. And there is the second little branch off of my leaf. And we're going to move down again to the next layer. So we're going to add 3 more of these dark green beads and we're going to put them on both wires. So both wires are going the same direction through 3 beads and we're going to move that up to sit right below that last fringe. And I kind of give a little bit of tug just to make sure that I'm eliminating any spaces between the last fringe and these little beads that I'm adding to the main stem down the center. So give a nice little tug there. And then I'm going to choose the wire that's a little bit longer and then move it over to the side that I'm doing next. So I'm making a branch on this side. Next, I'm alternating. So my next branch goes here. And this time I'm going to string 5 of the darker green. And then 2 of the lighter green. So we've got 5E to F. Push them all the way down. Now this one is where it starts to get a little bit harder. We're going to have a fringe inside of this fringe. So we're going to straighten out that working wire. Skip that first F bead. And we're going to take our working wire back down through just 3 beads. So you can scooch these out if you need to. If you need to scooch out those first 3 beads to get your wire back through, that's fine. Just make sure you push them back down right beside the previous bead, the rest of the beads in the fringe. So we're going back down through just 3 beads. I'm going to pinch and hold that in place so that it will reduce the likeliness that it's going to slip around. Now if you see my loop here as I'm pulling it through, it's starting to not be very straight. I'm going to stop, and fix that because that is possible that that will turn into a kink. And we do want to avoid those when working with fringes. All right, so I've pulled back through there and I've got this little teeny tiny gap between my beads. I'm okay with a little teeny tiny gap there. That'll give me a little bit of slack to get my wire back through as I weave back down again, which we're going to see in just a second. But if that gap were bigger, I would fix it. And hopefully that'll happen later so that I can show you how to do that. Now for this little fringe within a fringe, this next little offshoot, we're going to string 1 E to F. And we're going to push that down right beside there. We're kind of making a little Y-shaped branch. Straighten out my wire, loop it back towards my work. I'm going to skip that top F bead, just flip it down out of the way. And this time we need to weave back down through these 2 beads to finish off this fringe, and also the 3 beads in the previous fringe of the little branch that we're making to get all the way back down to the center. And it's easier to do that if you kind of turn your beads so that the holes in these 2 beads and these 3 beads line up so you can go all the way through all at the same time. So I'm going to go through those 2 and then down through the last 3 beads in the branch that I'm making. And then I'm going to pull all the way through, watch my wire, straighten it out, and pull through. All right, now when you're finished, you should have that. Now we're going to add 3 beads, again, 3E, to both bottom wires so we can move down to the next branch. All right, and again, I've kind of flipped it over so I can work on the right side. I'm going to choose the longest end of the wire and move it over to the side where I'm working. And this one is going to be just like this branch, but a little tiny bit longer. So we're going to string 6E and 2F. And we're going to move that down right beside those previous fringes. Straighten out the wire, loop it back towards my work, and we are going to skip that top F bead and then wire back down through 3 beads. Right, scooch those down so they're sitting beside the beads in the fringe and pull the wire all the way through. That's going to form a kink, so I'm going to stop and fix it. Okay. Now again, I've ended up with a teeny tiny little bit of space there between my fringes, but that little teeny tiny space is okay. All right, so anything less than like half a bead length is perfectly fine, and you can just kind of leave that without fixing it. But if it were longer than this, I would try and fix it. All right, now we're going to make our little offshoot little fringe again. So we need 1E and 2F. Scooch those down. Straighten out my wire, skip that top F bead, and then we're going to wire back down through 2, and then through all 4 beads to finish out the branch. So again, I've turned my new fringe, I've turned it so that my wire can go straight through both beads at the same time. You can technically finish off this fringe, pull it all the way through, and then weave back down to that one. That does put a lot more strain on your wire though when you do it that way. So I do recommend just going all the way down, all in one little swoop. So I'm going to pull tightly on that to try and eliminate any gaps there between those fringes. And now we need to move down again. So we're going to add 3 beads to both of the bottom wires. So 3E, scooch them up and give a nice little tug there. I'm going to choose the longest wire and I'm going to flip it over so I'm working on the right side. All right, now this next branch gets a little bit longer and we're going to have 2 little fringes in the middle of this branch. I'm going to string 9E to F, push that all the way down right against those previous fringes, straighten out my wire, skip that top bead, and then I'm going to wire down through 3 beads. And when I exit these little beads, I'm going to try and go upward because all these little fringes go up on our little cedar tree. Pull that all the way through, try and pinch and hold it in place. All right, so this space right here is a little bit too long. Even though I'm making 2 fringes, that little gap there between my bead is still a little bit too long. So we're going to fix that by just grabbing the very top bead in the fringe and then pulling on the working wire just a little bit. And then we're going to grab and hold again and then pull the working wire through again. All right, now whenever you pull your wire through the fringes, make sure you're going straight down into the beads, not at an angle. I should have mentioned that before, but pull your wire straight down through your beads because if you pull at an angle, it's going to put a little bit more strain on your wire as it rubs against the side of the beads. All right, now we're going to make some little tiny fringes sticking out of this little branch. So we're going to start with 1E to F. All right, just a tiny little short fringe there. Straighten out my wire, point it back towards my work. We're going to wire down through those 2 beads and then the next 4 beads. So I'm going to turn this little fringe and go down through the next 4 beads. And you might have to like bend your fringe a little bit to create an opening between that 4th and 5th bead so you can get your wire through. Try and make sure that the end of your wire is really, really straight before you go through. It helps a little bit. So down through 2 and then down through 4 in the branch. And then we're going to pull all the way through. Check your loop. All right. So there's our first little fringe on this branch, and then we're going to make another one. This one is going to have 2E and then 2F. Right, 2E, 2F. Push it down right against the branch. Straighten out your working wire. We're going to move that top F bead out of the way and then wire back down through 3. And then we also need to go through the last 3 beads in this little branch. So I'm going to turn my fringe again because I want the holes of my beads to line up so my wire can just go straight through. Straight through just those 3 beads so I can get down to the main stem of my leaf. All right, push it all the way through. And then we're going to pull, straighten out my loop so I don't get any kinks. Kinks are not good because they make a weak spot in your wire, and then they also make it hard to get the wire through the beads, so you kind of increase the chances of it breaking right where that little kink is made. So that's why we try to avoid them. So there's that little branch that we just made. And now we're going to add 3E to the main stem. So both ends of our wire need to go down through those 3E beads and push them all the way up right below that last fringe. I'm going to choose the longest wire. Every time I make a fringe, one of the wires gets a little bit shorter, so I'm going to move to the longest wire and pull that over to the side where I'm going to be making my branch. I'm flipping it over so I can work on the right side. All right, this next one is very similar to this one, but we're gonna start with 10 beads, or 10E, not 10 beads, but 10E and then 2F. So the E beads are growing as we move down the branch. All right, so we've got 10E, 2F. Put those right beside the previous fringe. Straighten out the working wire. Skip that top F bead, and this time we're going to wire down through 4 beads. So I'm going to go down through the next 4 beads in my branch, and again, for this first one, if you need to push those up out of the way so you can get through them easier, that's fine. Just make sure you push it back down before you pull your fringe. All right, so push and pull that together, pinch and hold, pull my wire through, fix my loop, and go all the way through. All right, so there's a teeny tiny gap there, which is helpful when you have multiple fringes to add within your fringe, but a larger one you would want to switch. All right, now we're going to string 2F and 2E. And scooch those right down beside the little branch. Straighten out my working wire, loop it back towards my work, skip the top F bead, and wire back down through 3. And then we're also going to go through the next 4 beads. So try and fold if you can, kind of bend that up so you can kind of create a space for your wire to come through. So down through 3, down through 4, and then pull your wire. And then we need 3E, 3 of the dark green, 2 of the light green, and we're going to move that down. Okay, so we're going to straighten out the working wire. Skip that top F bead, and then we're going to go down through 4, turn my fringe so that my bead holes line up, down through 4, and then down through 3, and then pull all the way through. All right. Now this time we're going to add 4 beads to the main stem. So we're going to string 4 of these dark green beads and put them on both of the wires so we can step down to the next branch. And this next branch is actually going to be a repeat of the previous branch. So we're just going to make that exact same branch again, just on the other side of the stem. All right, so again, string 10E and 2F. We're going to skip this top F bead and wire back down through 4 beads. Hold it tight and then pull the wire through. Make sure you fix your loop if it's not straight. All right, that's too much of a gap there. A little bit too much, so I'm going to grab that top bead and pull my working wire straight down through my bead. Sometimes you have to pull a little bit hard to get that to go through. All right, so I've shrunk my gap a little bit, which is perfectly fine. We're okay with a little gap, just not a big one. And then we're going to string 2 of the dark green and then 2 of the lighter green. I put those right beside on the little branch. Straighten out the working wire. Skip the top F bead. Wire back down through 3. Let me flip it here for a second. Wire back down through 3, and then we're going to go through 4. So I'm going to kind of shift my beads so the holes line up. Sometimes they require a little bit of encouragement to turn sideways. Okay. Down through 3, down through 4, and then pull. Straighten out the wire. And we will string 3F, or sorry, 3E, and then 2F. Push those all the way down against the branch. Straighten out the working wire. And we're going to go down through 4, skip that top F bead, go down through 4, and then there should be 3 beads left in the branch. Now, all of my little leaves here are actually a little bit different because I kept going through the wrong number of beads or adding the wrong number of beads, and that's okay. If you aren't getting these numbers exactly right, that's perfectly fine because all of my leaves are a little bit different. I would say especially with this branch, this type of leaf with these branching fringes, it's not incredibly important that you undo it to redo if you've got a slightly different number. If you accidentally went through 3 beads instead of 4, and so your next fringe is in the wrong spot, that's fine. If you accidentally get a wrong count for these little tiny fringes that are sticking up, that's fine. You don't need to undo them. They're trees. They're all a little bit different. So just don't take it apart unless there's like a really severe error. All right, so we're going to step down to the next branch again. So we're going to add 4 beads to both of the bottom wires, or the little tail wires. Push it up. And I'm going to find the longest wire. So one of those a little bit longer, and I'm going to move that over to the side that I'm working on. All right, now this next branch gets a little bit longer, and it has 3 little fringes in it. So these are the hardest branches, but they're the last 2. So we're almost there, guys. We need 12 of the E beads, and then 2 of the F, and move it all the way down right against the bottom of those fringes. Straighten out your working wire, skip the top F bead, and we're going to wire back down through 3 beads. Scooch those all together. And pinch and hold, and then pull the wire through. Fix kinks before they happen. Best defense is good offense. So fix your problems before they happen. All right, down through 3, then we're going to add 2E and 2F. Scooch those down right beside that branch, like so. Skip the top F bead. We're going to wire back down through the last 3 beads in that fringe, and then also the next 3 beads in the branch. So down 3, down 3. And then pull all the way through. This next fringe gets a little bit longer. We're going to do 3E and 2F. Push those right down against that little fringe. Hold them in place. Skip the F bead at the end. Go back down through 4. And then through the next 3 beads in the branch. So line up your holes so the wire can go straight through. Right, so down 4, down 3. Pull through, fix that, pull through. All right, we got one more little tiny fringe to make on this branch. And we're going to add 4 of the dark green and then 2 of the lighter green. Then we're going to wire back down through 5 and then through the last 4 beads in this branch so that we meet up again with the main stem down the center. Down through 5, down through 4. Like so. And then move that little branch back up into place. All right, so there's our finished little branch. And now we need to step down again. So we're going to add 4E to both of the tail wires. Oh, goodness. Okay. I'm going to grab the longest tail wire and move it over to the side where I'm working. And this last branch is going to be a repeat of the one that we just made. So again, we're going to string 12E. 5, 10, 12. And then 2 of the F. Move that down. Skip that F bead, and we're going to go down through the next 3 beads on our branch. Pull all the way through. Hold that in place. Fix that loop down like that. Check my spacing. Make sure I don't have a big gap. That one, I'm just going to leave that one. I'm going to leave that one because I've got 3 fringes. That's a little bit, it's okay. That's fine. Okay. Now we're going to do 2E and 2F for the first little fringe off this of our last branch. Skip the last F bead and go back down through 3. In this branch, turn my fringe sideways so the holes line up. And then we're going to go down through 3 and down through 3. Pull all the way through. Alright, so my camera stopped recording. Apparently I reached the maximum time. But luckily, it didn't stop too far back. All I did was I strung 3E and then 2F for the next fringe and right down there against the branch. Skip the last F bead and we're going to go down through the last 4 beads in that fringe and then 3 more beads on the branch. Okay, so we're going to go down 4 and down 3. Pull all the way through. All right, last little fringe, guys. We've got 4E and 2F. Those right down there against the branch. And then we're going to skip this last F bead, wire back down through 5, and then through the last 4 beads in the branch. Down 5, down 4, until you meet right back in the middle for the main branch. All right, move that, reshape that little branch there. Now for this last little bit, we're going to have a little tiny bit of beaded stem below the last branches. So we're going to add 6E, but we're only going to put the top 5 of them on both wires. The bottom one, we're just going to have on one of the wires. That way it can act as a stopper. We're going to twist the wires below. So that last little bead is going to act as a stopper so all these little beads don't fall off. I'm going to push that up, give it a little wiggle and a little push to try and eliminate that space between the fringe and the beads. So we've got one wire kind of going behind that bottom bead and one wire through it. So now we can twist these 2 wires below. And we're going to go down a little ways here. We're going to be assembling this little stem with floss. And having these little twists here will give something for the floss to grip. Alright, so I didn't need quite that much wire. I had a little bit of excess this time. And then our finished little cedar leaf will look like this. Now, if you're making the candle ring, you will make 18 of these. If you are making just the one pick, then you need to make 3 of these. So we have 3 leaves for one finished little sprig. All right, now let's assemble the little white cedar stem. We're going to be working with an 18 gauge stem wire. I've already got mine wrapped with brown floral tape. I've cut a 6-inch length. This is for the candle ring. If you were making the pick, I would use a longer stem wire, about 12 to 14 inches long instead of this little 6-inch length. Now I mentioned with the berries in the previous video that you could assemble the berries the same way as you do the cedar branches. So this is what I meant. You can use floss instead of using wire, and you can mount them on a stem as well if you'd like a little bit more strength to them. So I've just cut a couple of feet of green embroidery floss off of the skein. I'm using DMC number 986. I chose a green that would match my beads pretty well, because this is actually supposed to look like one giant leaf instead of 3 little leaves attached together. So in a real cedar leaf, this would all be one leaf, and these would all be like little leaflets rather than separate leaves. So to make it look like it's all one leaf, I'm going to use thread that matches my beads pretty closely. All right. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to take this first little leaf that we're going to put at the top of our stem, and we're going to lay it right on top of the stem wire. So right there, so the beads kind of meet right up there with the end of the stem. And we're going to take a little tail of floss and lay that down against the stem and pinch that and hold that all together right there at the top. Now as we floss down, we'll be covering over the tail of our floss to help secure it. I'm working with 6-strand embroidery floss, which comes a little bit twisted. So I'm going to untwist my floss so that all 6 of those little strands lay side by side, so I kind of get a little bit of a wider, flatter floss. That just helps to make a nicer looking stem. And then I'm going to start winding right there at the top, all the way down. I'm going to move constantly down. I want to make sure that my stem is completely covered by my floss. So I'm going to untwist my floss and wrap, untwist the floss and wrap, and I'm going to continue down to about 1/2 inch below the leaf, so somewhere around there. I just eyeball it. You can measure it if you want. And then we're going to add in another cedar leaf. This one has stem wires that are a little bit too long, so I'm going to trim these real fast. Okay. I'm going to add in the second cedar leaf. I'm going to put it on the side. It doesn't matter which one. And then we're going to wrap down. Whenever I let go of my floss, I put my other finger on the wrap so that they don't come undone. So I'm going to untwist my floss and wrap, untwist the floss and wrap. And I'm going to go down again another 1/2 inch or so below the last leaf, so somewhere around there. Oh no. Okay. All right, then I'm going to add in my last little cedar leaf on the other side of the stem. And then we're going to do the same thing again. Untwist my floss and wrap. Untwist and wrap. And try not to get tangled in there. What you can do is to kind of rotate your wrist instead of moving the floss around. That way it's less likely to get tangled. Or you can flip it upside down and just kind of spin your stem like this. Untwist the floss, spin the stem. And we're going to go down somewhere about 1 inch below this last leaf. So somewhere around there is where we're going to stop. And then we're going to tie an end. We're going to tie this little floss in a knot around the stem. So what I do is I take the end and I kind of flop it over the stem and reach through the loop that I just made and pull the end of my floss through. Just to make a little knot like that. I'm going to cut that short. And then we need to cover the end of this with floral tape. So I'm going to stretch the end of my floral tape, wrap it around the stem, and stick it to itself on the other side. Squeeze right there at the top as I spin to try and make sure that floral tape is stuck down. And then stretch, angle down, and spin. Stretch, spin, stretch, spin. Okay. All right, there is the finished cedar little sprig thing. Now, all of mine are a little bit different. I was playing with various leaf designs, so I've got several of them. These ones are actually a little bit bigger, but they were kind of borderline not having enough support, so I made them smaller again so that they would at least hold themselves up a little bit. So don't worry too much if your leaves aren't all exactly perfect. I'm pretty sure I left an entire branch off of some of them. So if you're making the candle ring, you should end up with 6 of these. If you're making a pick, you should just have 1.